Hello, welcome everybody. Welcome to our session here with Eve. How is everybody doing? Good? Everybody, feel free to chat in the chat group chat here with all of us. Just maybe your name, where you're coming from. If you want to share a little bit about what you're working on in Hack Your Summer, your project, that's great too. But also just maybe say hello, give us some feeling of people being here with us. I see. There we go. Yeah, how you are. Wisdom teeth removed. That's real. It's real life. Yep. It's in Missouri. We have. It's like someone's joining us from Missouri. It's you. How do you pronounce the name of the town?
Saint Genevieve. We
Saint
don't,
Genevieve.
yeah.
Go
French
vocal.
speakers would say it a bit differently, but that's how we say it.
Yeah, great. Yep. And I'm Kathy. I'm outside San Francisco in California today, and we're really, really excited to have Eve with us. I see a bunch of people coming in. Eve has a career that spans all kinds of different media, and I'm going to give it to her to introduce herself and her background in just a second. But just wanted to share a little bit about what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about careers in journalism and all the different roles people can play, how people can get started and thinking about the beginning of careers. And so, beginning of careers in media, but also beginning of careers in general, and all the different kind of steps of the process. So, really excited to host you today, Eve. Thanks for being here. And I'm gonna throw it to you to just introduce yourself a little bit more and get into some of the meat of today's session.
Yes, sure. Thank you so much, Kathy. I really appreciate it. And I just hopped on this opportunity. I saw it on LinkedIn. DJ posted that they were doing this in large part as a response to what we're hearing, that internships are not like they used to be. There aren't as many, or people are feeling that they're not as prevalent or accessible as they were. My name is Eve Troeh. I am currently executive producer of original podcasts at a small independent media company called Wait What? We are totally remote company, so we're not really based anywhere. We have a lot of people in LA and New York, some in the Bay Area, some scattered throughout the US. But I came to that role about 2.5 years ago, and before that, I spent my time in mostly big legacy media news organizations, whether that's NPR, Marketplace, the business media outlet, ESPN, and the New York Times. So I'm a little bit of a late bloomer when it comes to working in startups, and this is probably the most adjacent to tech I've ever been. Wait What produces a few original podcasts. We make the Masters of Scale podcast, which is really stories about business leaders and thought leaders scaling ideas, scaling businesses, scaling organizations for maximum impact in whatever area they're in. We also make Rapid Response, which is a twice weekly podcast hosted by the former head of Fast Company magazine, Bob Safian. So really business leadership lessons from people responding to big topics in business in real time. And then we make Pioneers of AI with the wonderful Dr. Rana El Kalyubi, who is herself an AI scientist, entrepreneur, and now leading a venture fund in AI with a specific focus on inclusivity and emotional intelligence in AI. So that's who I am. That's what I do these days. I noted in the chat, I am in my hometown of St. Genevieve, Missouri. And you will note this is my name I am in my childhood bedroom. And this is my name on the wall. I've had that since I was a toddler. My mom is downstairs taking a nap. So this is the glamorous world of media. Welcome. And but it's super exciting that we can meet this way and spend some time together. So I'm here to talk some about journalism and storytelling. How I got my start. I did get my start as an intern, so I thought I would talk a little bit about internships in media. What you might learn if you do have one of those, and think through with you some ways that if you're not going for a classic internship in media, what are some of the skills that you could still learn asynchronously otherwise, or tools from journalism and storytelling that could help you sort of no matter what area you're interested in going into and what kind of project you're working for. I'm going to take a second to look at the chat and see if there's anything specific people are really looking to hear about or learn about today. I'll just take a few seconds to let you put that into the chat and try to keep that in mind as we go through, and we will have some time at the end for questions. But it's just me. I don't have a lot of slides. I don't have a lot of things to play. So if I don't have samples of work to play. So I'm here for you and to give you what's most useful for you in this session today. Um, I wanted to start with this room because I was in this room when I found out that I had received an internship at National Public Radio right after undergrad. I had majored in journalism, and NPR had told my college advisor that they'd offered me an internship, but they forgot to tell me. So I like to say my media career started with an HR oversight, but that's okay. I got a phone call at my mother's house, asking me when I thought I would be in DC to start my summer internship with the arts correspondent Susan Stamberg, a legendary person at NPR, at National Public Radio, based in DC. She's called one of the mothers of NPR, and she had hosted All Things Considered, if you know that program, for a long time. But she was at that point then kind of making the rounds, hosting different shows, being a field correspondent. And I didn't know how to answer that question because I had no plan for how I would possibly go live in Washington, D.C. for a summer. This was an unpaid internship, by the way. Some of the internships were paid at NPR. This one was not. So I didn't know the answer, but I said, I haven't decided that yet. Let me get back to you as soon as possible. And so I proceeded to, beg, borrow, steal any way that I could to figure out how to spend the summer in DC unpaid, going into downtown DC to the network headquarters every day. I wound up getting a college friend's parents to host me for the summer. They lived at the very last stop on the metro line in Virginia. I did not have a car, so I did need that metro service to get me in there. And I hustled up a plane ticket, which I think I had some savings bonds from my grandma that I still had, or my graduation money, and I made it to DC and I started. So scrappy is always the name of the game when you're starting out in a career. I think I had not even applied for that internship. I had wanted to be on the international desk or the politics desk, but I definitely said yes. And I got to, yes, be with Susan Stenberg. And in fact, because I'm home, you do get a special little look at the archives here. I found in a drawer of my certificate, it's backwards for you, I think, but it says NPR on
No, no, we can
there.
see it. We can see it.
Certificate of Appreciation and Recognition of my work as Susan Stamberg's intern. Summer of 2000, guys, the dawn of the century. so so that was that. Um, and I think that that internship, was really a solidification. I really wanted to be working in public media. There was no radio training. There was no, it was sort of like an odd thing that kind of fell between television and print. So since that time, there are some radio podcasting specific programs that have sprung up. But I think that that may speak to many of you. If you're interested in emerging forms of media, you may not have specific classes in your college courses that are teaching you how to do these formats. Even if you're studying journalism, you may not be learning specifically how to tell a great story through Instagram Reels, or how to make a documentary series that's actually a bunch of web shorts exploring different areas of a certain topic you're interested in. So in that sense, I didn't have the specific training, but I had the organization. That was sort of a North Star for me, where I wanted to try to be. And I used that as my sort of calling card. While other grads at the time were really clear that they wanted to be in newspapers or wanted to be doing television, radio was, for whatever reason, that was my thing. And so I really went for specifically that. And easy to say, I'm glad that I did. We would not have predicted that podcasts would have taken off, nor would we have predicted that podcasts are now video. In fact, what even is a podcast anymore? We don't know. But I knew it was the storytelling that guided me, the mission of public service, explanatory journalism, the style and the tone of the place that I admired so much, and that I was a consumer of myself. And so I really was lucky to get a chance to do that. So I'll pause for a second there, and I will ask: what kinds of journalism are people here interested in today? What sort of things do you consume? What outlets? What formats? What styles? If there are any areas that you're interested in specifically, if there are any podcasts that you want to shout out, I'd love to see it in the chat. I'd love to see too where people are joining from.
Yeah. So go
Yeah,
ahead and
that's
don't
always
be too
great.
shy.
Yeah,
Just
yeah,
anything you like. It's you said it could be it could be an Instagram or a person YouTuber that you like watching. We had Michelle Curry
totally.
join us in the first session. She was amazing. It was great to hear about her experience. Yeah, video podcasts. I still listen to all my podcasts in headphones, and then when there's something funny happening on video, I'm like, wait, oh, that's right, everything's video now.
Yeah, yeah. So
Yeah, go ahead.
that's that's great. Video podcasts. Yeah, great.
I'm
Lots of
99%
different programs.
invisible. Got some
Oh,
Roman
so
Mars
good.
fans in
Yeah,
here.
it's fantastic, fantastic. So a couple, I'll just name check a few people who were interns with me. Audie Cornish at CNN, Bobby Carter, who is the head of Tiny Desk at NPR, was an intern in my class. Megan Verlee, who heads Colorado Public Radio editorial, and Ann Hepperman, who's head of originals at Audible. So I have like a few people from my intern class who have stuck with mostly audio and media all the way through. And, those are just, it's just so exciting that I'm still in touch with some of those folks today. In addition to many of the people who were senior to us and working with us as interns at the time at NPR, I've stayed in touch with over the years. So, what did we do as interns? Well, I got to follow around this one amazing talent, and I got to see Susan Stamberg host all kinds of different shows, which was incredibly valuable. So, that's something I would say is really hard to do if you're not in a building or a workplace that's making media. But if there are ways that you can join interviews remotely, I highly suggest that you do so. If there's a way for you to sit in on an interview for someone you admire as just an audience link. Sometimes that's possible for remote recordings. If you have ins at media companies and you want to get some kind of like behind the scenes view, I would suggest you brainstorm ways, or I'm happy to brainstorm with you ways to kind of get into that, because that's really the best benefit of being there, in the room where it happens, so to speak, as an intern, is you're getting to see the conversations. You're getting to see the editorial meeting where they're deciding what stories to talk about that day, what order they should go in. You're hearing ideas for who they should talk to about it, sources that they would like to book, whether that's that day or sometime down the road. You're hearing the thinking about the angles on stories, like, okay, this is the third day after the earthquakes in Venezuela. What's going on with the recovery effort right now? What makes sense to talk about right now? If people are still in danger, if there are aftershocks happening, if there are relief efforts underway, you hear people kind of like gauging the conversations that will lead the news of the day in relation to where events are in the timeline. And then you also get to hear them talk about, things that they don't want to go into. Sometimes that's super interesting. What's sort of not making the cut, because you don't know that as a media consumer. You don't know what didn't make the cut. So that decision making on display is really great. The framing, the story angles, there's a lot of value in just hearing how things are pitched. Like, you know, hey, I know we've done this story for 5 days straight, but I really think it's worth leading with this a 6 day because of this reason, or because there's access to a great source. So and so has offered to give us an interview later today. I know it's really soon before we're going on the air. Now, this is live broadcast news. And obviously, things are different if you're working in something like podcasts that are really like baked and shipped ahead of time and not live and dynamic. But those are some of the benefits you get from being there in the newsroom, and being privy to the conversations that happen around editorial. And then sitting in the interviews themselves, really paying attention to what questions are being asked. When does the person doing the interviewing stick with what their sort of roadmap is for the interview? When do they sort of decide to go off book, if you will, or off script and ask a more conversational follow up? And when do they sometimes just, ditch the roadmap altogether, and you kind of hear them in real time deciding to just go a completely different direction with a guest because something's not working that they're trying, or something's more interesting to them than they plan to talk about and they want to go with that. Those are all some things that I definitely really learned as an intern when I was there. I'm going to say that, I also got to get my hands on the tools of production. So that's a huge thing you want to do if you get the chance to intern. Don't be a passive bystander. bystander, make sure that you're thinking about stories and working up your courage and your skills to eventually pitch stories and ideas yourself. I would say it's still sort of the norm not to necessarily do that right away. There's a lot of value in watching and learning how other people are doing things to kind of get those dance steps down. If you have an idea, to understand the timing in which you're bringing it to a group or an outlet, and also understanding, about what the strongest angle is going to be to pitch it to start with. What are some other factors you need to include if there's an idea you have? But the production tools are a big benefit of having access to the network as well. I was there when, digital audio editing was already happening for sure, but it wasn't very easy to get your hands on like consumer grade software for audio editing. So even simply getting like the temporary producer login and getting to sit at an editing station and work with actual audio, with actual material from an interview, and getting a chance to like shadow cut it, that's something I would suggest you could offer, or ask someone if you could do. Like, say, could I just as a test, get my hands on some raw material to practice with, and see if anybody's interested in vetting the results to like see how you did compared to what the final product was. Or you can obviously do that with your own work as well. I think, that decision making is what you really want to get reps on, and also just the quality of the final edit, the style of like learning your craft of editing, the technical craft of editing, which is obviously huge in the social media age as well for video. Kind of the timing, the rhythm, all of those things, those norms of how much do you clean things up? Does something sound too clipped? Does it not sound natural enough to be a good edit? Those are all things that were really valuable for me to get my hands on. I'll share.
Yeah. Oh,
Yes,
go
go
ahead.
ahead.
I was going to
Go
have a
right ahead.
follow-up question. Can I have a follow-up
Yeah,
question on that?
please go
Yeah, I
ahead.
think it applies to any area where you're trying to gain skills, this kind of tension between wanting to watch and see how it's done. Maybe sometimes people want to jump in too quickly and they need a little bit of time to watch and see what, learn some of the norms, or not jumping in enough, kind of being too passive, maybe not contributing as much, not getting a chance to get your hands on. For folks who are starting out in a group where they're trying to figure out like what pieces, can I take on myself? How can I get that experience? What advice do you have for them about how to kind of approach maybe the mentors or the team they're working with to get more active, maybe?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think one thing is to identify what skills you do really want and need to learn. So if you're, wondering how something gets from idea to a finished media asset or a story, whatever format that might be in, audio, written, any kind of a digital piece that might incorporate other elements. If there's something about that you don't know how to do, you don't know how to do graphics or animation, but that's part of a story that you want to tell, or part of that's a skill set that you want to learn. Just be really vocal about what you already know how to do, what you don't know how to do, and what you would like to get better at, even if you do know how to do it. If you've never done it in a professional context, or to have a publishable, public facing result. I think don't be shy to be upfront at the start of your experience or the start of your interactions with a mentor about where you need some skill development. For me, I got my big opportunity at the end of the summer because I had done one or two of these like shadow cuts on an interview, that another production assistant. So often the people, the entry level folks who are already working full time, are your allies and your friends. They're the ones who understand what it's like to be in your shoes, and they're the ones who understand that like you need an opportunity to get your hands on some real world examples to work with. So at the end of my summer at NPR so long ago, because I did know the basics of cutting audio, when the person who produces the underwriting credits went on vacation, I was asked to fill in. So I was sitting there with the voiceover artist who, um, you know, was reading spots for Subaru, who is still a major sponsor of NPR. So that was my first actual paid production work was, recording the voiceover for these Subaru, ads basically for NPR, and then cutting them down to the time they needed to be and delivering them as digital audio files. Was it what I wanted to do? Absolutely not. Was it anything close to, traveling overseas as a foreign correspondent and like reporting on important issues? Absolutely not. But it was paid production work at NPR, and I was thrilled. So that's the opportunities that come if they get you something that you want, if they prove, that you can do professional level work. I would say, be open to all kinds of things that may not seem immediately related to your end goal or your highest purpose.
Yeah, that's so great. And it does require this introspection of like, what do I want to learn? What do I know already I can contribute? Where's the place I want to go and communicating that? And so it's really, yeah, really important. Great. Okay, thanks. I'm gonna hand it
Yeah.
back.
Okay, great. So a couple of things then from my role at NPR that summer, I did actually move to New Orleans where I worked on a really small team on a music documentary show that was nationally syndicated. So that was my first full-time paid job in media production. It wasn't quite news, it was definitely documentary and it was definitely fact-checked and researched. But it wasn't, so squarely in the news features world, which was made very clear to me when I did try to go over to news from there. There was a sort of, well, you've worked on this music show, but that's different from covering current events or international affairs. So just to say, the skills, the editorial skills and the production skills are not always considered, the same thing. And they do involve different types of judgment and research. But so from that music show, I did get to meet so many amazing musicians. I did get to live in the city of New Orleans and get to know it really well. What happened really was that Hurricane Katrina hit New Orleans. And so after that happened, there was a huge need for news coverage in the city. And while I didn't have a lot of news experience, I did have the opportunity of being there and the willingness to try. That is really where I cut my teeth in breaking news of all different kinds because there was just such a need for coverage. And I would do everything from helping reporters who were coming into town with any of their production needs to eventually freelancing and filing my own features, whether those were very short breaking news stories or whether they were longer features with lots of voices and lots of sound recorded out in the field and that kind of thing. But as an intern and as an entry level producer, a few of the core things that you would probably be asked to do are to write. You will not be writing necessarily stories or features, but you might write things like show notes for an episode if it's podcasting, promos, short things that say coming up on Marketplace tomorrow, and then you've got 20-second script to write and a piece of tape to pick to make it really great. You might write an introduction to a story or at a digital print outlet, a deck or like a summary that might need to go other places to promote it. You might be asked to help with things like the newsletter or the social media captions. And all of these are auditions. All of these are real writing. You are getting the chance to do real writing that the public will see, and you should absolutely try to knock it out of the park every single time. It is worth it to make it funny, charming, sparkling, interesting. Of course, it also still has to be accurate, fact checked, spelled correctly, titles of everyone have to be correct. But every opportunity you have to write is basically an opportunity for you to showcase your skills and your talents as a storyteller and a writer. Now, I want to add this to these next few things I'm going to talk about. Can AI do this? Now, yes. There are plenty of ways to feed, say, your full podcast audio or video into any chatbot you want and ask it to generate a 150-word summary that you can use as your show notes as you upload your podcast to Apple Podcasts or Spotify or whatever it is. Um, and I would say there are plenty of places and outlets that are more than willing and are already doing that. So in that sense, this moment is interesting because there are tasks that AI can do now that used to be strictly the domain of interns or production assistants and entry-level workers. And I know this is a huge debate in the working world today, which is also why I wanted to bring this up. But the thing is that the ideas are not there in the AI. So if we're talking about an introduction to a story, for example, like there's some concerns about the chocolate supply right now, is one thing I've thought about. AI is not necessarily going to come up with an opening question like, when's the last time you looked at the label on your candy bar? That's something only a human is going to come up with because you understand that a human might care about that. A human is going to eat that chocolate bar. AI is not eating chocolate, as far as I know. Does not have the ability to eat, to taste, to actually have the impact of the stories that that news is telling. So that's where I think, there are things that AI can do, but if we're talking about persuasive writing, and all writing is and should be considered persuasive, that, you've got an opportunity and an advantage as a person that outlets that really care about reaching people and drawing people into their work are not going to get the same result with AI that they can get with people. But it does take practice. And if you're not getting the opportunity to write these short things, then you're not getting the reps and the training to write longer and bigger things and to sustain your storytelling skill over bigger areas of content, bigger timelines, and bigger projects. Research is something interns often do at media organizations. If there's a big topic coming up, like let's say something, the World Cup just ended, you want to look at like World Cup ticket prices across different markets. Interns might be helping a reporter working on a big feature package about that, research this, monitor the news about it, try it, go into different ticket selling platforms and see what kinds of prices come up. There are all kinds of ways that interns help with that, like ground level research that then gets distilled into the synthesis and the takeaways of major storytelling and journalism. That research is also something AI can increasingly assist with. However, AI can't necessarily ask the right questions or come up with the sort of different variations. Well, what if someone's trying to buy a ticket in a different market than they live in? Or what if they're trying to buy tickets for overseas family members who want to come? How can they, find out about that? Different angles to the story that only humans would think of are still really important to research to make high quality journalism that really serves an audience. But again, AI is something where you can get research done with it, and it may be displacing some of the work that interns and entry level media workers have been doing in the past. I already mentioned this, but one thing we do with internships is sit in on everything, sit in on editorial meetings. If there is a meeting about special coverage, maybe there is a big question about energy prices, for example. Oh, we need to really get some good ideas going around energy and energy prices, as that considers to be a big topic in American life. Sit in on that meeting, even if you're not invited. See if you can talk to the person managing you or your internship program or someone um, to ask on your behalf if you can have access to a specific meeting or a specific topic area that you'd really like to be a part of. And again, think about, this is something interns and production assistants often get asked to do, is to take notes during meetings. Certain meetings might have even like a whiteboard or a Google Doc where they're keeping track of everything. Are AI note takers doing that these days? Absolutely. AI note takers are taking notes in meetings all over the place. This meeting's being transcribed, and we can definitely go through those notes with AI later. But I think what an intern, what a person, what a human brings to that is the synthesis and the ability to distill, what's important out of the meeting. You may know that, okay, this thing was mentioned, but then the conversation might have gone around in a circle to where, oh, actually, never mind. And the AI might not catch up with that so quickly. So there's still a lot of value to sitting in on everything, being the eyes and ears that can more accurately distill and prioritize what came out of those editorial meetings or a brainstorming session about how to cover a topic. So again, there is that tension. Sure, it could be cost cutting to have AI do it, but if we're not training generations of media makers and storytellers in these kinds of distillations and prioritization skills, then we're really losing something valuable in the world of journalism and storytelling. I already spoke about this as well. Get your hands on the tools and make something. If you have the chance to do it, ask for logins, ask if you can have access, ask if you can. Remote work can make this really tricky. because in an in-person internship in media, you might sit in on an edit. You might sit in while a video editor does their work. You can still do that over Zoom. You know, it doesn't have to be intrusive. You can literally just ask if an audio engineer or a video editor can screen share and just sort of let you watch while they put together the final product or the next draft in a project. A few tools that we use at Wait What that I wanted to share that, you know, these are tools that require a subscription or require a professional account for the professional level features that we use. So Riverside.fm is the podcast recording platform we use for remote recordings. That's video and audio. Descript is a really powerful tool that transcribes video and audio into text, and you can actually edit from that text transcript. So that's something that's becoming really common these days. We do use Premiere for video editing. We are also always trying all kinds of new tools that are AI driven tools for making video clips, for adding graphics, and we're seeing those things change and evolve like every few weeks. Sometimes they're separate softwares that we're using for these things, but then the new main software that we use will add features that are sort of like that. So this is all evolving really, really quickly. We also have access to professional microphones and cameras. And I think those are the kinds of things that can be really hard to have access to if you're not part of a mentorship or internship or entry level training cohort at an organization. So just something to be mindful of as you enter the workforce, that you may have had access to things as a student that you don't have access to anymore. So anytime you do have access to those, or if you can think of ways to gain access to those legal ways, don't go stealing anybody's logins or subscriptions. That's something to really keep in mind about the tools that you need to do the storytelling that you want to do. And then again, I'll say, you know, AI is, like I said, changing the landscape for media production all the time. I think what we're seeing though, just to be honest, is even with something like a clip for social media, we really are not getting a publishable result from only AI at the moment. Like we can't just trust AI to select and then actually clip things that will have the right entry point, the right exit point without human intervention, human decision making, human prioritizing of what is actually the most interesting thing about, you know, this clip even for social media.
Yep. Eva, I do see we have a couple questions from students
Yeah.
that I think are going to go into some of the lead into some of the next stuff you wanted to cover. Can we maybe take a question about pitching a story, building a narrative from scratch? Does that sound like a good
Yeah.
place to go next? Yeah. Giovanna, do you want to come off mute and ask your question? I think it leads right into some of the things Eve wanted to.
Yeah, I was just wondering, how would you build a narrative from scratch, like when you're starting out? And also, like, how do you understand, like, the message you're trying to tell? Like, would you start with what message you want to come across, or like, how do you come about creating that message in your story?
Yes, yes, definitely. So a big goal of any internship at NPR when I was there, the goal was to produce, report one feature story by the end of the summer. So take it from idea to recording and writing, post-production and publishing, as if it were a feature on one of the news magazines. And that is definitely a very complex skill with a lot of steps to it. One thing I would say is don't be afraid of imitation. It is indeed the highest form of flattery. You all mentioned some YouTubers and people you really like. I would just say really study closely what they're doing. Like maybe transcribe a video that you really like and look at the words and think about, oh, what's a topic that you would want to take on in a similar way? Notice what they're doing. What is the first sentence that you hear them say? What is that sentence doing? Is it setting up the story? Is it starting with an assumption? You know, really like look at the nitty gritty, the words that the person is saying to the audience and how they're walking you through that story. Especially when it comes to social media, short storytelling is very, very, very hard. It's very difficult to tell a story and not be long-winded. Case in point today, I'm probably going on way too long about a lot of this stuff, but it's very hard to do short. So if you find people who you think are really effective storytellers in short formats like social media, study exactly what they are doing. Study where the edit points are, study when the visuals change to B-roll, like really see, break down into components the story that they're telling and how. A story should have, we all know this from elementary school, a beginning, a middle, and an end. And perhaps as improbable as it sounds, any story, no matter how big it is, can should be able to be boiled down into one sentence. This is what I call and I think of as your story sentence. And it's as simple as X is doing Y because of Z. So Eve is speaking to Hack Your Summer today because people entering careers need support for how to break into media and journalism. I might need to tweak it a little bit, but that's, a sentence. It's an active sentence. It has a subject, a verb, and an object. X is doing Y because of Z. I'm going to type it here. I'm going to give you a PDF at the end with some of these things in it as well. Um, and if anybody has, I'm going to talk for another like 60 seconds or so, but if you're ready to come off mute and give a sentence that you think is your story sentence, it can be for a story you want to tell. It can also be the story of a project you're trying to do if you're not working in the journalism and creator and media space. But that is really a very good goal to strive for. Can you boil down what you want to say into one of these, strong, pithy story sentences? It really makes you distill it into kind of the essence of whatever it is that you want to tell as a story. It's a tough one. Think of a couple examples. I did a really fun field trip. I'm in Missouri, as I mentioned. I went to the St. Louis Fed, where they have an economy museum, and they give you these little bags of shredded money. And I just thought that was so freaking cool. And I was like, if you wanted to do something like this, there are so many stories in this little bag of shredded money. I might do one. If someone wants to do one, please do it. I would love all stories about this, like prompted from this little bag of shredded money. So oh, that's amazing. So one sentence might be, well, why is the US even shredding this money? Say, the Fed shreds money because it's not able to be in circulation anymore. Okay, that's kind of boring. But it's like the Fed shreds 80 million pounds, I am making this up, of money a month, um, because they don't want people, using bad cash in public. Also, still pretty boring. We're not, I'm kind of striking out here. I'm striking out here. But you could even make it about the Fed. The St. Louis Fed hands out bags of shredded money to drive home the interesting relationship between physical cash and value. I don't know. Did that work? Are we getting there? Are we getting any closer? I mean, this is hard work. This is hard work. But I think that there's a time when you can like really think about it. And this can apply all the way up to certain things like, you know, Los Angeles is losing, can't account for money for programs to address its unhoused population because why? Because officials have not closely tracked the nonprofits distributing that money. This is just a really valuable exercise, and it takes a while to get it. The sentence itself should really be interesting and compelling. And this is what's so hard about pitching, one of the hardest things about pitching. So I'll leave it there for a minute just to think about that. And if anybody wants to try one, go right ahead. Is AI contributing to massive layoffs is a great question. I think that is actually a great story, like um, I'm trying to turn it into this story sentence, which maybe I'll give up on in a second. But it's like, tech companies, the story is the story we're hearing is right. Companies are laying off workers because of AI. Okay, that would be the story sentence, right? I know this doesn't actually answer your question, but I think we're going to try to do double duty here and kind of do both. That that in a sense, it's hard for us to know if that's true or not. We can say economists are trying to figure out whether AI is actually leading to massive layoffs because they suspect that companies are cutting costs due to other economic pressures and blaming it on AI.
Yeah,
Now that you'd have to figure out whether
right.
that sentence is true or not. But there are these, again, like these distilling sentences that can really help you figure out the story that you're trying to tell and then how you're going to try to tell it. I'm going to give you a pitch checklist as well as a few strategies for coming up with original, what we call enterprise stories to tell. Enterprise stories are stories that are really original and aren't just necessarily flowing from news that's already happening or from the headlines, but stories that are sort of under the radar or things that you would only know if you're interested in or part of a specific community. Those are really good lanes for people starting out in journalism and media to try. It's very hard to jump in as an early career person in media and say, I'm going to report on international trade policy, or I'm going to report on, the war in Iran. Like these are things that you have to find opportunities that really suit early career skills, and oftentimes those are things that are sort of at the margins of what's going on, or really specific impact stories that have impact on a specific person or a community. So those are a few best bets for early career folks.
I see another
Some,
good one here.
yeah,
China
yeah.
banned relationship chatbots because they think they do more harm than good or something as that each one of these topics people are coming up with, you can do that. I'm going to check with you
Yeah,
about time. Either Kathy is
yeah,
checking with Eve about time because we're supposed to can you go a little bit over and take some more
yeah,
questions?
yeah, I
Can we
absolutely
go
can.
all the way till the hour? We're trying this experiment of a 45-minute sessions, but it's not working.
It's totally fine with
It's
me.
okay with you? Okay.
I just dropped in the
Yeah,
chat a PDF that I made
great.
with some resources at the top, some great programs and ideas to get free training for organizations that support early career journalists. I also included in there some great ideas for enterprise stories. These are enterprise stories that don't require necessarily huge budgets or access to special tools or access to famous and powerful people. These are like really intimate original stories. That's the great lane for early career journalists and storytellers to go. Try to like looked in places that everyone isn't looking. That's where you can find opportunity and really make a mark and tell a special story that isn't the same thing that everyone else is trying to do. And then at the end, I included a pitch checklist with a few things you should really try to include in your pitch for a story, that are what the editor of the organization or the people at the organization are going to want to know. So the more you have, the more you can give people in your pitch and along these lines, the more likely it is that they'll know that you're serious and you're capable of actually executing the story.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you. Thanks for sharing these resources with everybody. We'll make sure to share them on Discord as well, so that they're not lost here in the chat. Sometimes that's hard to go back to the chat. There was one question I wanted to get to from the beginning, Jordan. If you're here and you want to ask your question about kind of picking the right stories to go along with the message you want to send, Jordan, are you here?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you. Sorry, I am walking on the treadmill right now. So if you hear that in the background, that is why. But yeah, and I think Eve, thank you so much for your time. I think some of what you've already said about building sort of the XYZ framework really helps with this question. But I guess I'm just sort of curious, people who are great at presentations, it always seems to me that it's because they have a really good story that fits their narrative very well. So I guess I was just wondering if you have any suggestions for frameworks or places to find inspiration when you're trying to build some sort of story inside a presentation in order to connect with the audience.
Yes, yes, definitely. Um, if you're trying to build a narrative to connect with an audience, I think the main thing is to keep the audience in mind. Remember that this is for someone. What does your constituency, your audience, what do they most want to know? What will really make them understand the point that you're trying to get across. And that's way easier said than done. But I think when I'm personally stuck on kind of the boundaries of a story, because a story can't be about everything. It has to be more distinct and discrete. So if you think about examples, specific examples are really, really great. You'll notice in great speech writing, the weaving and in great narrative feature writing, the weaving between the personal and the broader is constant. You know, people will like zoom in and zoom out. So say take something like the loneliness epidemic or chatting with chatbots. You know, there's sort of the broader phenomenon. How many people are using chatbots every day? What do we know about what they're using them for? Is there research from the Pew Center or other places that might tell us what the main use cases for chatbots are? Then can you zoom in to a personal story of the source or a family and their experience with a chatbot, positive or negative, whatever you can say. You know, we interviewed a woman on Pioneers of AI who found a lot of comfort in a chatbot who, because she could speak with that chatbot in her native language, and she was married to someone who didn't speak her native language. And so it was a really specific role that a chatbot was playing in having her be able to express herself. Um, at the same time, we know chatbots have been really controversial and led to some really negative consequences, especially when they're being used by younger people who maybe don't have the emotional maturity or using them in ways that can be really harmful. So, you know, thinking of where you're going to zoom out and then go broader is a really way to think of fitting narrative and storytelling into something bigger, like say a speech about a policy or a presentation about a company, you know, making it personal. We see this with founders all the time, right? In the origin story, that I think at times it comes across as a little inauthentic because we've heard it so much of like, you know, my aunt was afraid of spiders. And I don't know how this relates to a tech startup idea, but so I created Spider Gone so she would never have to see a spider again. Like we all know that sort of cliche stereotype of like a founder pitch for a story. So I do think that that story should be authentic. It should never be kind of just used as a ruse to get to the broader thing because I think that people really, really see through that right away. But that relationship between intimate, smaller narratives and bigger, broader points is really the key to all kinds of storytelling for all kinds of reasons and formats.
Yeah, there's a question here about the tension between catching people's attention and aligning with the truth. And so,
Mm.
Fong Che, do you want to put take come off mute and ask your question a little bit? Or maybe maybe you see his. It's written here, Eve.
Yeah,
What makes a good story? Something that catches people's attention, or something that aligns with
yeah.
the real and complete truth?
I think this is such a great question. And I think that there is a way sometimes that journalism does over-index on narrative because stories that are good stories that have a lot of tension and drama and, you know, like spicy, juicy stuff to them are not necessarily the most important things for people to be paying attention to, right? This is always the case. These are the tensions that we struggle with in journalism and with news. So a good story, I think if you can really drive home the the real and complete truth is also a subjective notion, right? I would say I put it more on like the impact on people's lives. So if something is what's going to impact a lot of people. And if you think about that tension in news, it's like, okay, if you were covering, say, health news, disease affects way more people than, say, a very small, rare disease that only a few people have. But if that rare small disease has a fascinating story because there's been a scientific breakthrough there, you know, that is an important and interesting and attention grabbing story to tell. But telling a story about, you know, maybe a very small but interesting piece of data that, you know, researchers have found about heart disease will actually impact more people. But what if like the scientific takeaway of that isn't actually so strong? It's like, oh, we thought that, you know, walking 60 minutes a day was what you needed to do to address the risks of heart disease. But it turns out even only 30 minutes a day will be great. Well, that's not like a heart stopping, sorry for the pun, headline, but that is still something that would impact a ton of people. So I would say like catching attention and real and complete truth is like it's a really stark way to put it. It's often just so much more nuanced than that. And it's a real challenge in journalism and storytelling not to be sensationalist around those lines or to cherry pick things that are really interesting but maybe aren't the most important thing to be talking about on a given day. And that's what, media organizations are balancing all the time at the organizational level, is sort of the mix of the right amount of sort of feature reporting versus mission driven and service journalism, that the need to know versus interesting. I know it may not totally
Yeah.
answer your question, but it's a way to think about it.
Absolutely. We'll do two more questions and then we'll wrap up. Actually, Alex, I said I would go to you next, but I'm going to go to DP because it's kind of on the same theme. And then we'll wrap up with your question, Alex, about the journalism as a career, which I think is a great place to end. So, DP, do you want to come off mute and ask your question? Okay, sorry,
It's
I can't.
okay.
Okay, yeah, that's
No,
fine.
go
No,
ahead.
I know if it's this project, I know a little bit. So DB is asking about when you're talking about something specific, how you can avoid perpetuating cancel culture when your goal is encouraging dialogue with your readers and offering more context. For example, a topic that DB is interested in is cultural appropriation in fashion. So there's, it's kind of a hot topic, cultural
Hmm.
appropriation. What is it? Is this it? Is this not? How do you think about it? And I think she's asking about how to avoid, how to get into a real dialogue around that instead of something that feels more like black and white cancel culture.
Yeah. Yeah, well, there are a couple of layers there. I mean, there's the piece itself, if you're talking about reporting or writing or a presentation that you're giving. And then there's also, like the audience reaction to it. So if it sort of depends on what you're talking about. If you're talking about how, people are just going to read the story and interpret it a certain way, that's very hard to control. But I think the best thing you can do is to be clear about the point of view that you're taking in the work itself, to be nuanced and to offer something that is conveying the point of view that you're hoping people will come away with. Um, if that someone's going to be just really reacting very strongly, if there are, certain buzzwords we know that are just going to make people completely shut down and judge the sources at hand, I think perhaps one strategy is to just address that. Ask the question, like ask the question of your sources as their critics might. Like in this case, I obviously don't know the details, but if it's something like, okay, in this garment that you created, you used this motif, and that is, a very sensitive thing for this particular culture. What do you say to people who find it completely inappropriate that you utilize that in your collection? So you have to, if you can give the source themselves a chance to respond. And you can also sometimes take a longer lens. You can take a lens of history. There's recently a really interesting topic that came up in sports and women's sports. The coach of the Toronto Tempo was just suspended for a game over a comment around the player Angel Reese, who's on the Atlanta Dream. Something happened, a foul was called, and the coach said something like, "Oh, you're calling this because, Angel's a protected species." Now, the coach is Australian. She was saying that this is a common phrase in Australia. Athletes say this about each other because it means like, oh, they get special treatment from referees or from someone else. And it was perceived as being racist and inappropriate in the US. The coach apologized. Angel Reese, a player, accepted her apology. There's been a lot of coverage of this, exchange that was probably 10 seconds, and it's led to both sides sort of generating their own news cycles about it. But in terms of cancel culture, it's very hard to know how you can control that yourself as the narrator of the story. There may be people who will decide, okay, I don't like that coach, and don't really want to, I really don't want to, like, engage with her. I don't support that coach anymore. I don't think she's being genuine. I don't think she's authentic. And we other people who say, okay, I hear that out. I hear what her explanation is. Angel Reese accepted her apology. I'm moving on. So that's, there's no way to necessarily avoid it in your piece itself, except to be as clear and to provide clarity and as much open dialogue as you can provide in the piece itself. But in terms of reader or audience reaction, that's very hard to do. I would say your best bet is just to try to address it in the piece itself, to ask it as a hypothetical or ask it as a question to the sources themselves.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks. That's great. I think as people are trying to navigate their own work in this environment where there's so much, so complicated. It really helps to hear some of the ways that you would think about it and some of the tactics you would take. So, last question, I want to go to Alex. Alex, do you want to come off mute? You can if you like, or I can help.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So my dog is snoring very, very loudly under my desk right now. So forgive me if there are any funky noises. But so I'm thinking about transferring into a journalism major, except I've heard kind of a lot of commentary, like online and in person, about like kind of the value of a journalism major. And I see like scary statistics, like 87% of people regret it. So I was just wondering about like what do you like if going back in time, like would you still pick the same degree as someone who's gone down that path? And like what would you say the value of a journalism degree is today to somebody who wants to go into the field?
Mm. Well, I did have a double major. My other major was anthropology. So just to be clear, I did get a degree, technically a liberal arts degree, a humanities degree, as well as journalism. I learned a ton in journalism school. I went to USC as an undergrad. I was, an academic scholarship kid from the Midwest. I did not expect to go to USC. I didn't even know that you had to apply to go to the journalism school, to be honest. I didn't know it was like a special extra thing you had to get into. So I was very, I'll say lucky. It was serendipitous. I wound up at such a great program that as undergrads, they really let us get our hands on real tools, had real working journalists as professors. Our sort of core journalism course was we divided into teams and we had to report on the city of Burbank, which is a small suburb of LA, as competing newspapers. So I got a ton out of my journalism degree. I learned how to write quickly and clearly. I learned about certain norms of asking questions, how to ask questions, what does on the record mean, what does off the record mean. I understand that, jobs in strictly like traditional journalism are shrinking, that area of journalism is shrinking. I do think the skills are incredibly valuable. I think they make storytelling stronger because you know how to weigh things like tension, you know how to push for good quotes out of people, to not just accept the first thing they say, but to ask a follow-up and get better material from them. You know how to write characters, you know how to weigh different viewpoints, like, okay, this company says that the smoke coming out of their smokestacks is completely fine and nothing to be worried about. Well, of course they're going to say that. They're the company, producing that narrative, whereas the environmental nonprofit is saying no, it's toxic. Well, I mean, maybe of course they're going to say that. They're the environmental organization that's been fighting to get this factory shut down for 35 years. So sort of what you learn as a journalist is really a framework and a way of thinking and of balancing viewpoints, information, serving the audience in nuanced ways that are just needed more than ever before. So there's so little original reporting going on. I think that's the most valuable thing you can learn to do is to do original reporting, to go out, find out for yourself, to tell a story of something that's happening and to put the points together, distill it into something greater than the sum of its parts. I know that so much of news right now is, obviously people shouting at each other, but even more importantly than that, it's just opinion and analysis. It's just taking the facts that have happened and then putting spin on it, putting opinion and analysis on it. So I think I would look at the program itself and see what their focus is. And if there is a lot of training in original reporting and you're getting hands-on experience in original reporting, I think that is still going to be a valuable skill, no matter where the journalism market goes. And no matter, if people decide to, there will also just be so many interesting things evolving. Like there will be cohorts of creators who are coming together to cover certain topics that basically are making a newsroom, whether they would call it that or not. There are going to be newsrooms exploring new formats. There are all kinds of new models that are popping up all the time. So it's a really, really challenging time for journalism. And the career ladder for it definitely will not look the same now as it has. It's changed over time since I entered the field. I certainly never expected to be at a small startup myself, but I'm really loving a lot of the ways that we think about stories across formats and the ways that we work together with all different backgrounds. So yeah, don't give up on it, but definitely look at the program, weigh the costs, weigh what you want to get out of it, go into it understanding what you want to get out of it. and take it from there. And I'm happy to answer questions if people have questions. My LinkedIn is in the PDF I put in there, and happy to be a resource if there's any interest.
Yes, thank you so, so much, Eve. Let's everybody thank Eve for being here. Thanks for spending this extra time with us and getting to all these great questions. There's so much that people want to do and learn, and so much people can contribute in their careers in this area. So thank you for sharing some of the things that you've learned, help get everybody started or continuing in what they're trying to do. So thanks again for being with us. Really
Thank you
appreciate it.
so much. Thanks so much,
Yeah,
everybody. Have a great rest of your day.
yeah, you
Bye.
too. All right, thanks. Bye.